about I show.
Well, falcha orif, harstin, is misha Michael Mulcolrick, Agus Biminam Fedentoi, Oikenach. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Kennedy. I am going to be your host for tonight. Welcome to you all. Sound and Ballymore, Halifax, Hami. I'm coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the passing of Ronnie Campbell this last week. Ronnie was, in addition to captaining the Loch Arbor team that won the Highland Championships in 1995, he was just a tremendous tradition bearer with lots of Loch Arbor lore and tradition. Many of us on this side had the great opportunity to spend some time with Ronnie, enjoy his warm hospitality, and tap into that knowledge. And in fact, I had a dream this week that I was visiting with him again. So we're going to miss him very much. Fash Yiriga. So what are we here to do tonight? Well, as many of you know, this is called the Gaelic Narrative Project. And what we're doing is trying to let go of narratives that don't serve our culture very well and try to embrace more of the stories that we do want. And tonight, or this series that we're doing now, it's called Gaelic, this one this year. And it's really about that kind of dual meaning in Gaelic of Gaelic, which is enough and plenty. And tonight's session is it's called It Takes a Village. So we're looking really at what is enough from this perspective of a village. And we're going to have a perspective, I hope, from either side of the Atlantic. I see one of my guests I don't think has made it yet, so fingers crossed that he's going to show up here. So first thing we're going to do before we get underway and kind of dig in a little bit there is we're going to go into breakout rooms just to say hello, get to know who's on the call tonight. So you'll be in a group with 3 people, hopefully. That's what we try to aim for. And the breakout rooms, we're going to have 10 minutes. So you'll each have about 3 minutes. And what we try to ask you to do for the 2 breakout rooms we have is first go in to say hello, meet everybody, but then we'd like people to share their story and everybody else listen. So each take a turn. So take about 3 minutes to say, tell your story, and then let somebody else talk. And we're going to put the question up in the chat room here, but what we'd like you to do when you get in there is to introduce yourself and then tell us about a time when you connected with Gaelic in a way that made you feel fully satisfied. So that can be Gaelic language or culture, hospitality, friendship, whatever it is. Okay, so the question is up in the side there, and I think Natasha will send us into the breakout rooms for the next roughly 10 minutes. We'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
Hello, Avicho. Kimber, how are you?
Oh, good on. And you, Seamus, don't look around.
Seamus, how gosh.
All right. Well, I think if everybody's coming back here, so welcome back, folks. So I think we're going to get the session underway with Rodney and Angus Brendan. We'll just wait for the crew to gather them together.
I did see him. I think it's under Angus MacNeil, is it?
We expect so, yeah.
Yeah, Hamisho.
You're very stealthy tonight, AV.
I better put the B in the name there.
There we go. So, well, welcome, Rodney and Angus Brennan. Very nice to have you here. Falcha orif.
Tablet.
So what are we here to talk about? Well, we call this It Takes a Village. And essentially that's the idea of how the village nurtures the child and how the child in turn will nurture the village. So what is it that sustains us and that sort of thing. So I'm going to actually say a little bit more about that after I introduce Angus Brandon and Rodney. I think it had a kind of an interesting experience I want to share that might shed a bit of light on what we're here to do. So I'm going to start with Angus Brandon. So Angus Brandon is a native Gaelic speaker from the Isle of Barra. He he started his working life as a civil engineer, but also as a Gaelic reporter, and then switched gears and became a Gaelic medium teacher in Lochaber. And now is the Member of Parliament for the Western Isles. And I think that's given him a quite a unique and intimate connection to the Gaelic community in Scotland. He's grown up surrounded by Gaelic, but also has been all over the Gaelic speaking parts of Scotland and has a kind of a nice understanding of what's going on there. He's also been in other areas that are sometimes called remote, that I think also has maybe changed his thinking or changed his thoughts about what remote means and what the possibilities are. And I'm hoping he'll share a bit about that as well tonight. And then on the other side of the Atlantic, we've got Rodney MacDonald. So Rodney is from Mabou, Cape Breton, and his family are noted tradition bearers in fiddling, piping, step dancing, both sides of the family, the Beatons and the MacDonalds, and they trace their roots back to Lochaber. Rodney is a fiddler and step dancer himself, carrying on the tradition in that way, himself living it. But he was the Minister of Tourism, an MLA for Inverness County, Minister of Tourism, and the 26th Premier of Nova Scotia. And he's now the president of the Gaelic College. So he's also formally involved in trying to help sustain the community into the future. So I think we'll get some really interesting perspectives from either side of the Atlantic tonight. And when I was putting this together, I had a really interesting experience. I hope it's interesting to you. It was interesting to me. There's a couple of songs I was thinking about that might be nice to welcome people in. I thought in honor of Angus Brendan being with us, a couple Barra songs, and two came right to mind, one of which we started the program with tonight. I started looking for pictures to put up on the website to advertise the event. And all of a sudden I had this kind of epiphany. I just saw this amazing array of connections. And that's really what we're talking about tonight, is how we're connected. And so I thought I'd share that with you because I think it speaks to what we're here about. So Natasha, if you wouldn't mind putting that first photo up. So Rodney, this is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the cemetery in Mabou. Is that correct?
It looks, you know what, I think that's the cemetery in Broadcove.
Oh, yes, that makes sense.
Cemetery in Broadcove.
You fiddlers get all the great gigs.
I had to figure out which one it is. I played in a number of them, so.
Well, the reason I put this picture up is the first song that you heard to start the evening is actually in praise of the MacDonalds. It's h-Eileanan Collegasta. It's about one particular one, Alexander MacDonald, the son of Call Kittoch. And he was considered probably one of the greatest Highland warriors. He flourished in the 1600s. But the singer is Nan McKinnon from the Isle of Barra, from Contagaville in Barra. And if you look in the background there, I'm pretty sure Rodney's being photobombed by Dougie McPhee, who is a good friend of ours, who very happily now makes his home over here in Mabou. And as far as I'm aware, Dougie's McPhees are really closely related to Nan McKinnon through her mother's people from Mingulay. And Nan McKinnon was from Contagaville, but she emigrated or moved to the small island just off Barra of Vatersay as a young girl. And when I was a boy in school, the editor of the newspaper in my town was the late and lamented Jim MacNeil, who was from Vatersay, who also probably knew Nan quite well. And I think Angus, your family knows Nan as well. So a couple of connections there. So Natasha, if you play the next song, this is the other song I was thinking about. So that line that you heard, "Fleuch a nacht is fuere," wet is the night tonight and cold. If the MacNeils put to sea, the men of the high-sailed fast ships with banners of blue and green. So if you could put the next photo up, please, Natasha. So here are two descendants of those seafaring MacNeils. So obviously on the right is our guest, Angus Brendan MacNeil from Barra. And on the left is Rod C. MacNeil from Barra Glen in Cape Breton. And I've seen pictures of your boat, Angus. Does it meet the high-sailed swift ship criteria?
When I repaired a couple of holes, it'll be back to that standard.
I think maybe that's what they used the banners of blue and green for, was it?
Caulking.
Well, Rod C. here was a beloved tradition bearer in Cape Breton, a great Gaelic singer. And in addition to his own family, who are two generations, which are great proponents of the culture, he was a great mentor to both young and old here in Cape Breton. And I don't know if he shared this story with you, Angus, but he told me years ago, he made his first trip to Barra quite a long time ago. And that was the first person in his family ever to go back to Barra after the first emigrations. And he was taking the ferry from Oban to Castle Bay, and he struck up a conversation in Gaelic with the barraman. And the barraman had been working in Glasgow for years and years. And at one point he turned to Rod C. and he said, "And how long have you been away from Barra?" Rod C. turned to him and said, "About 200 years." So Rod C's from Barra Glen, which is on one side of Grand Narrows, and on the other side of Grand Narrows is a place called Piper's Cove. And the singer you just heard is Katie MacNeil, or Katrina Nian Alin Callum Peepit, I think is what is the Sláinte for. And she was recorded singing the song Coshi Caroon, it's called, in the 1930s by John Lorne Campbell of Cana. And he actually bought Cana and lived on it. He was a pioneering folklorist, one of the first people to actually make recordings of Gaelic-speaking tradition bearers. And I say he owned Cana, which is where my Kennedy ancestors emigrated from to Nova Scotia in 1790. So like Rod C., 200 years later, I was in Scotland, and I got in touch with John Lorne Campbell, and he was very gracious. And I was asking about these recordings he made in PEI in Nova Scotia in the 30s. And he told me that the oldest person he ever interviewed was one of my relatives, who was well over 100 years old. And he said, "I remember he told me a very funny but slightly risque story, and his 80-year-old daughters would go, 'Oh, Dad, don't tell him that one.'" So the same time I was in correspondence with John Lorne Campbell, I met Ronnie Campbell. I visited with him, and I asked him about this. Well, I actually asked John Lorne about a tradition that the Kennedys were not from Cana, but from Loch Aber originally, and he said he thought that was true. He figured they had moved after the 1745 rising. Then I ended up in Loch Aber at Ronnie Campbell's house, and I asked him the same thing about this story in Nova Scotia about the Gaelic MacDonalds and the Kennedys being really closely related. And he laughed, and he said, "Just down the road from here in Kilchonate, there's a place called h-Eileanan, the field of the dance." He said, that is where the big wedding celebration was held when the two Kennedy brothers married two daughters of the chief of the Gaelic MacDonalds. And Rodney, I'm pretty sure that's your MacDonald's, because they're from that same area and they're part of the Gaelic branch. So, and then that's the year I also met Angus Brendan. And guess what song hit the top 40, cracked the top 40 on the UK pop charts that year?
Coshi Caroon.
Yeah, the modern version of Coshi Caroon, the song that John Lorne Campbell recorded on a wax cylinder in Piper's Cove 60 years before, maybe the first time it was ever recorded. So thinking about those ties, I think that's what, the community can mean a lot of things, but for me, it's what is it that weaves us together into something more than just a group of individuals? What makes us, gives us a certain pattern and that sort of thing. And many of you may have noticed this piece of tartan cloth on the loom on our website when you signed in. And for me, there's two pieces to that. There's this piece of what ties us together here now, the weft of the cloth, and then there's the warp of the cloth. It's the connections through time. And if the weave is too loose, or the threads are too weak or too few, the cloth can come apart. So that's essentially what we're here to talk about tonight, is from these two perspectives on either side of the Atlantic about our Gaelic community. What is it that is weaving us together? and how strong is that weave right now? So thanks for coming, guys, especially to you, Angus. I know it's quite late there in Barra tonight. And very nice to have you with us.
You're very welcome. Taplet.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So I'll throw the question out, and then what I'll do is I'll ask it. I think I'll start with Angus, and then Rodney, I'll turn it over to you. So the first question I have here, sorry, my screen is giving me some grief. So how did your Gaelic community nurture you growing up? What gave you a sense of fullness and so on? What gave you that sense of fullness and plenty?
Well, being a politician, first I'll dodge the question you've just asked and say that it's given me a calior and a good feeling tonight is to see a Dale Gillis. I think I've just seen his face online, and I don't think I've seen Dale since 1997. I see Dougie and Cathy Ann, so most of Barras McPhee's are on as well. But what gave me the feeling? Actually, probably my father definitely had a lot to do with Gaelic, and he was a postman. And in fact, I've just another story jump into my head as I've seen Cathy Ann. He was asking Cathy Ann one day by St. Bar's Cemetery, I think he was, to write her name for a recorded delivery to get her signature. And Cathy Ann joked, she was about 16 or 17 at the time. She said, one of these days, Ian, it'll be an autograph. And actually, Cathy Ann at 16 or 17 was actually quite right. And they said all that in Gaelic, of course, apart from the words signature and autograph. So it was that feeling of people all around you. But my mother was from Ireland as well. So I think my dad became very conscious of us having Gaelic and making sure that people around about us speaking Gaelic. He also, as a postman, noticed when electricity came to Barra that some of the children stopped speaking Gaelic, such was the power of television. I think in Iceland, they've noticed a sort of a change in language as well. Again, the power of television, the sort of, maybe in Iceland it's at a good stage because there's an increased bilingualism, but it's starting at a younger and younger age, and it shows the power of a language that's coming through such a strong medium as the TV. So probably the feelings of enough or the feelings of plenty were probably in and around that time. And now as the years go past and you look and you think at the young age of 51 as I am now, and you remember all the people that were about, you do recognize how things change. And I was speaking just in the breakout room to Florence Ann McIsaac there, who was originally from Burstall and is now living in Sydney. And we're just talking about that, just how things change and how people change and how things move on. But one of the good things I would say about the Calior and the plenty of it all is that we've always had a good laugh with Gaelic. And language gives you the opportunity for sort of more jokes, more puns. And I've even tried to learn a bit of Icelandic, and I've found that you can even manage a bit of extra humor with the more languages you have. So sometimes I think you can get worried about language and that you're carrying something on, you know, and you're trying to remember what was there. But you can also just increase the humor capacity of life by throwing in an extra language. And also it's great code as well at times, and probably an even better code for you guys in North America. But just be careful, because there's always a time when somebody says something about somebody, that the most unexpected person. As I was told recently, of two fellas who were walking around in Brixton in London saying something about somebody down the road, and it turned out one of the black gentlemen going past came back and addressed them in Gaelic, which was quite a shocker for them. So you never know when the code can be cracked. It's not exactly the Enigma machine you need to crack it, but you know, I think the strong thing I'd say is humor and laugh, and also the feeling of a bond. There's a guy, Andreas Wolf, who's a German, who's a very good Gaelic speaker. And, you know, we were talking to him one night and became apparent that although he speaks the language of 1 billion in English, and he speaks the language of, in Scotland, let's say 70,000, and if we throw in the people that are in England and the people internationally, we maybe start to reach, with you guys in Canada, 100,000 people. He said, nobody of the 1 billion has ever bought him a pint or a dram for speaking English. He says, but the amount of drams and pints he's had bought for speaking Gaelic, which was when I started to learn Icelandic. There were 300,000 of them, and I thought I'll try and learn Faroese. There's only about 50,000 of those, and that will increase my chances of a dram with somebody. But I've got to say the Icelanders were pretty generous themselves, so I can't complain. And actually, there was a bit of a crossover to Faroese, so I I got a dram out of the two of them, and I laughed with them all. So I was quite happy. But I think the thing about language and where we're from and what we are is learn it for fun. Learn it for code breaking, learn it for saying things, learn it for understanding the past, if you like. But there's a million reasons. But for me, I find that language is fun. It gives you a laugh. And on a Friday night at what's the time? It's now 25 to 12. It's given me the opportunity to talk across the Atlantic as well. So tap leave. You're muted, I think, Mike.
You're mute, Mike.
Thank you.
I was stunned you to silence there.
I'm just thinking, I'm not getting any drams. I'm not too happy about this.
I
was going to ask you,
their own Gaelic speakers.
when you were young, were there still Gaelic speakers in Barra that only spoke Gaelic?
Yeah, well, just before I was born, my mother came here as a district nurse, and one of the last people she nursed was Ben Stuvey. Who his son, Cathian, will definitely remember, Dougie will remember, he used to drive the bus, Alex Stuvey, the school bus. He probably took you to school, Cathian. But Alex's mother, Ben Stuvey, was the last monolingual, my mother said. And I remember that she was speaking to her at the end. My mother was sort of on the cusp of sort of accelerating up through her Gaelic. She learned a bit of Irish Gaelic in school. She was one of the kids that Eamon de Valera forced the Gaelic language on, and 90% of the Irish kids hated this experience. But on the other side of the coin, 10% quite liked it, and luckily my mother was in the 10%. But she was talking to Ben Stuvey towards the end, and Ben Stuvey was a religious woman, been to church all her life, and was certain of the eternal life and what have you. And my mother says to her, thinking she'd be at peace. El Shutolish Jafalav, are you happy to go? And Ben Stuvey, God rest her on her deathbed, said, Berlin Fudach Siena with Fat the East. I'd rather stay and do it all again. So, yeah, it was because of that little humorous story of the love of life that people have that I realised that my mother had nursed maybe the last monolingual speaker. And that was probably in about 68, 69 or something like that, that Ben Stuvey. I don't know if Cathy Ann remembers it, but that was a year or two before I was born. You do, Cathy Ann, yeah. So she died then, and she was, according to my mother, the last. And my mother knew one of the great things about being a district nurse, and if you wanted to learn Gaelic, you were just dealing with people who wanted to speak Gaelic in the final days as well. So she also had a laugh in the nursing as well. Although I don't suppose that was the main point of being a district nurse, was the comedy value at all.
Yeah, I just thought it was such a great example of Guido. You know, if she probably had no electricity in her youth, and maybe not even indoor plumbing, running water.
Oh, definitely not. No.
Yeah, and she couldn't wait to go back and do it all again because.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was for dark nights. There was no internet. I mean, at this time of year, it would have been cold. Tonight it's about 9 degrees centigrade in Barra, but the Januaries then were quite a lot colder, a lot darker. But yeah, she wanted to do it all again. Berlin Fudach Siena with Fat the East.
That's all you can ask for. Thanks for that, Angus.
I hope I'm saying the same at the end of it all, It'd be nice.
Thanks very much. So, Rodney, I want to pass it over to you. So give us a picture of what it was in your community that made you feel like that you really had an abundance of Gaelic.
Well, first of all, Mike, thanks to you and also to the project team for having us here tonight. And great to see you, Angus, as well, and great to hear you. And I as you're talking, I'm smiling because I enjoy your story so much. And anyway, it would have been a pleasure to serve in the legislature with you, not across from you, but beside you. Anyway, I just want to say I was thinking about this the last little while, and I guess there's different points in a person's life when they would feel there's enough or there's plenty, but in particular, when a person was younger in the 70s and the 80s, and it wasn't something you just thought of, it just didn't happen, it just was, and you're surrounded by it and you're living with it. So my parents were not Gaelic speakers, but of course my grandparents were, and many people in and around the community of Mabu were, so you were never far from it. It was mentioned the sense of humor. It was mentioned, some of the sayings that people would have. And my parents would have sayings too, and they'd often bring that up, at home, or something they'd hear someone else say, and would always have a laugh, But in particular, there's a couple of things that were coming to my mind. I was thinking back into about the mid 1970s, and for me, of course, as a dancer and a fiddler, the music side of it was very important with the culture. And there was a couple of things that I was thinking about, and one was remembering, being dancing with my mother and standing on her feet. And I was only small, little fella, but I was learning timing. So the timing wasn't taught to me by a fiddler or anything like that. It was taught to me by my mother in the kitchen, and the feel of it. And I guess when I think of Gaelic culture, I think it's about the feel of it. It's very organic. It was very natural. It wasn't something that that was forced upon you. It just was. And it's funny, for many, many years, that would usually happen around 6 o'clock when Scottish Strings would come on the radio, CJFX. And we just started the radio station a couple of weeks ago here, the CBFM at the college here in Bainbabel. But for many years, I'd be waiting on a regular radio station to hear, like, a fiddle tune and then a song and this and that, and you wouldn't hear that, and I really missed that, and it reminded me of back in the 1970s. And Howie MacDonald said this to me the other day. He said, I felt like I was listening to Gus McKinnon, at sometimes, because they'll say, it'll be a rock song, and then it's, here comes Janelle and Cameron with the next song, that sort of thing. And he's right. And so the other night I was watching, here's my mother dancing with my one of my children, one of my youngest children. And what's she doing? The same thing she did with me in the mid 1970s. And the wording that she was using, talking about, earlier that day with a Cayley, but she wasn't using visit. She was talking a Cayley, and with the other kids. And I was thinking, okay, this feels, enough or plenty, at that moment. And I hadn't felt like that in a long time, to be quite honest with you. But I felt like that a lot in the 70s and 80s. And because I think one of the key reasons why was, and I used the word time. Time was looked at differently. And Angus alluded to TV, and we have internet and all the rest. But it really was, at the end of the day, people made more time for things. And so if I went to my grandmother's to play tunes, you weren't going for a lesson or anything like that. You were going, first of all, you did your visit, then you did some tunes, whenever it started. Then someone came in and they might jump on the piano, my Uncle Angus, Don Angus, or my Aunt Joan, who lived in the house, might jump on the fiddle and then jump on the piano. And then, of course, you made time to have, your tea and cheese and biscuits or whatever it was. And I feel like once we hit about the 1990s, that may have started changing. I guess that I don't want to go into your other question, but so it was very natural. And or if my uncle Aunt Mary was in the house and should start playing a tune on the piano, and Danny Graham would be there, and he might play a tune on the fiddle, and he'd sing a Gaelic song, and I'd play a tune, and it was very natural, very organic, and I think what it was a certain pride about it, and you felt that pride, yeah. So if you went into the store, you heard it. If you went to school, I was lucky to have it in elementary school from Margie Beaton, of course, and so I would say that was, and there was other moments too, I guess, at times, but as a politician, sometimes you never think enough is enough, but because you're always trying to do more and more and more, and
share that story, Rodney, about being on the campaign trail with the fiddles.
Oh yeah, well, like every house I would go into in Inverness County, every house, especially my first couple of elections, every house I go into, they were waiting for you to come. I needed my fiddle tuned, and I've been waiting for you to half the election to come, and I'd be tuning fiddle after fiddle, and I guess after a couple, they had them all tuned, so they weren't worried about it so much after that. But especially back in 1999 and 2003, the number of fiddles I tuned, and ended up playing tunes in different, some not so great fiddles, and others great ones, but but that pride, you know, and there was always a certain etiquette as well, and it was different. It was there was an etiquette even in the music world that was there. A respect, the respect, you know, time, respect of the culture, and not that there's not respect today, because there is, but in a different way, a different type of respect. And the last thing I'll say to that is, I recall, you know, my father wasn't a Gaelic speaker, but he worked hard, and he had a very Gaelic way of living about him. And I recall he liked to do everything by hand. So we were digging this hole in the ground, and I'm not kidding. You'd be standing at the hole, and you'd look up out of the hole, because both of us were in the hole, and we had a pick and we had shovels. And of course, my neighbors up the road, the McEachans, they had machines, and I'd be looking at the machines saying, you know, why don't we go up and get this machine up there? Be in the morning, just when we're starting to dig and be hitting rock and everything. And he'd say, no, we have enough. We have plenty. Yeah. We have plenty. And I think what he was trying to say is, you know, we have the time.
Right.
We have enough. We're not in a panic, and you're a lot cheaper than getting that machine up the hill too. So, but the reality was that he was right. You know, we had the time, and we had the time together, and that was more important than borrowing the machine. So.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Rodney. I think I've danced with your mother as well, and I think I've stood on her feet too, but probably not in such a cute way as you've done. Right. I'm going to throw this next question out to both of you. This is a real quick one.
I was just thinking that.
Go ahead, Angus.
When Rodney was saying he started by dancing on the women's feet, his mother's feet. I presume he stopped. Unfortunately, I still do that from time to time.
That's another connection you and I have, Angus Randon.
I'm not exactly Fred Astaire, unlike Rodney there.
Right, so I'm going to throw this question to both of you. So just a real simple one. If you're able to invite people from the community 4 or 5 generations back to visit with you today, what one thing would surprise them most about the state of Gaelic in your community today?
James, I suppose if I've thought of gathering up when my father took ill. He had a stroke probably about 1999, 2000. And it was quite a shock when it happened, because I remember thinking there's no rewind of this video. And I just thought, you know, because it was a sign of moving on, although it was another 10 years before he died, but he didn't walk and talk. And I thought, imagine if he was there with his father and his father's father and his father's father's father. It'd be quite an interesting group of us just to get together. Your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, your great-great-great-grandfather. And see maybe who got on with who best, and who'd be like, what would the company be like, and would every second one get on better, because it would be a father-son tension, but a grandfather's grandson, just life's easy and fine. What would that be like? But I think when they all come back, they would probably be surprised. It's just how much the world's changed, and I think the linguistic change would be the same. But I suppose, you know, if you could go back far enough for us, and back to 1266, when we stopped being part of Norway and the islands here and became part of Scotland in the Treaty of Perth, there's an overlap of language as well. So maybe there's a sort of because you see it in our place names, Tangisdale here where I am, and Eoligary where Cathy Ann's from, and what have you, and the hills with Val at the end of them, meaning Fjall or hill or Ben. So I suppose there'd be a shock right enough. And probably the pace of it would surprise my grandfather most. That would be the thing. He died in 1944, so he'd definitely be surprised. But goodness, I think so much has changed. And talking about this with a lad in South Uist, he's only a couple of years older than me, but he went to school on horseback, and they didn't have running water. And now he lives in Glasgow and drives a flash car and what have you. So his children reckon he's been through the biggest changes in just one person. That sort of, sometimes this has just come at a breakneck speed, the sort of the changes. And I think maybe the changes between me and my children are less. You know, Meatloaf, for instance, died in the last 24 hours. And I was listening to meatloaf with my youngest daughter, who's 16, and we could both quite enjoy meatloaf. But I'd imagine if I listened to meatloaf with my father, he'd say, "Turn that racket off, for goodness sakes." So, my father was born in 1934. So I think there's that. The change of the mass media and the change of electricity and everything else has maybe changed things. That's the best answer I can give you, Mike. Other than I was going to say, when I heard that Rodney went round and people were asking to play the fiddle, that never happens to politicians over here. Because I think the voters just naturally assume that all politicians here are on the fiddle anyway. So there you go.
Thanks, Angus. Rodney, over to you. What one thing do you think your ancestors would be most surprised about the state of Gaelic?
Oof. Well, I suppose that right today they might be pleased to see what's happening, trying to see a revival, to be honest with you. And I guess I'm thinking of, maybe not that long ago when my parents were growing up, and there was that push for a lot of families to to encourage their kids not to learn the language, and to have it as something that was, not going to further their cause economically, or there was no sense in learning the language, from some people's perspective, and so I think there'd be some pride, and in that regard. But to Angus's point too, the speed, and I mentioned that before, time, and just how fast, and that it's funny how things start creeping in. It's not just, it doesn't impact just the language, because if you listen to a lot of the older speakers or older tapes and things, people are talking slower, and I guess taking their time more, and that was in the fiddling as well. There wasn't such a rush on the fiddling and the timing, and that crept in, that started creeping in. So I think they'd look at something like that and they'd be surprised by, let's say in the music, the different types of tunes they'd be hearing that crept into the music. Whereas, someone like my grandfather, Donald Angus, or his father, Angus Ronald, and others would have been playing more tunes that they would be, many would have come from, Scotland, Ireland, and, or like many with Gaelic words to them, or Porth de Beal, whatever it might be, and many pipe tunes as well that would have originated. So I think they'd be surprised by that, in that regard. So, some might say too, well, that's not the real Gaelic. They might say, well, that's learned Gaelic, or school Gaelic or something like that, So, and I, we often heard that even in Nova Scotia for many, many years, and really probably, up to the last, 10, 15 years, and I think that's been a very positive thing where you don't hear that anymore, not near as much, you know what I mean? Because people are just happy to see people learning but wanting to make sure that it's grounded as well, and that we don't lose the real stuff, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
I think Mike, if I can jump in, Rodney's made some cracker points there, really good points. I think that the idea of that sort of revival, and since about the 1870s in Scotland, since the Education Act came in, there's been, and probably actually before, since Culloden, some might argue, but certainly since the Education Act came in, there was a real message going to a lot of people that Gaelic was a dead and dying language, and bilingualism was the wrong thing, unless of course it was Greek and Latin, and then bilingualism was quite a good thing. But the message was going out quite strongly. And I think Rodney's touched on a really good point there, that if I had that connection there of my gatherings of my grandfathers and great grandfathers and what have you, probably those who are around in the 1870s onwards might be quite amazed to find there's a TV channel, for instance. Firstly, amazed, of course, at TV, but a TV channel in Gaelic, a radio channel in Gaelic every morning. And as Rodney was saying, there's sort of a pride and a definite want to use it, that government as stationary with not just Scottish government, but Realtas na Hallapa as well. And I think, looking at that big point and that broad point, it is a very big positive, and your mind can be sometimes just drawn to the changes that you see are negative, but there are a lot of changes that are positive as well. And it's a cracker of a point that Rodney raised. So thanks, Rodney, for that. You've changed my perspective. The evening's been worthwhile.
Well, I think you had an interesting experience too with your time in Iceland and the Faroes too, about the idea of remote rural communities and what they can expect. I think that's really changed your thinking too.
Absolutely. And since we spoke, Mike, actually yesterday, the Scottish government's announced that they're going to do some feasibility studies into tunnels and linking islands and the Sound of Harris and the Sound of Barra and perhaps even Mull to the mainland, which all this would transform the west coast of Scotland. But when I first went to the Faroe Islands in 2007, which is now nearly 15 years ago, they had 2 undersea tunnels. They're about to complete their 4th undersea tunnel of about 10 kilometres in length to connect the island of Sandoy, which has 1,200 people living on it. And the Faroese have got the best 4G in the world as well. Their population has grown 10%, despite being in the ocean in the middle of Scotland and Iceland. Some might unkindly say the middle of nowhere. But they certainly don't think it's the middle of nowhere. And, you know, so much positive has happened there. But the biggest thing the Faroese, or many of the Faroese will tell you, that happened for the Faroese is their own language being revived. And that gave them a whole different outlook and dynamic. And the people will tell you that you'll get the sort of the hardened capitalist types who own the ships and have no time at all because they're so busy, they've got more money to make tomorrow. But they will say, that it's very important that we've got the Faroese language. And then, of course, you get the more artistic type in the community who you'd expect to be more on that wavelength, if you like. But to find that cross-sectionally is really interesting. So the achievements they've got of the growing population, the highest birth rate in Europe, actually, the fastest broadband going in the world, the fastest 4G, faster than South Korea, in fact, and these undersea tunnels. It makes it quite a dynamic community. And it's interesting to see that they do this. Oh, and the other thing I'd say that they've probably got is they've got the on-island political decision-making as well, that they can do these kind of things and quite a number of things that we just can't do yet. So maybe once Scotland's independent, we'll look to move decision-making powers from Edinburgh and sort of cantonize Scotland the way Switzerland is, and we'll maybe this is just a bid for power I'm talking about here. Maybe I'm just fancying setting up the lordship of the Isles, but not the MacDonalds in charge this time. We might have the MacNeils in charge.
Well, we'll see.
Sorry, Rodney.
We'll put you both in a real room together, and we'll see how that.
I see something that the MacDonalds are the biggest clan in Nova Scotia, and MacNeils are only 5th, but the MacLeans are allies are 6th, so it's all right. We're happy with that. I will take the McPhees.
Well, you know what, to your point, Angus, too. Basically, you know, in a lot of ways, I think that we just have to have the mindset that, you know, you know, if we want to do something, we can do it. Doesn't matter how big or small the area. And I think for a long time, many of the communities and many people, we were told not to expect it. And to me, you know, that's just a load of, you know, BS, to be quite honest with you, because we can do it. And, you know, when I would say something, I'd say, well, we should be doing this or something. My father would say, well, just do it. What you're talking about it, just do it. And there's no reason not to do it. So find a way to do it. And there's always a way. And I see that happening in our Gaelic community, with, you know, with people wanting to start Gaelic programs in homes or in schools, or, you know, and wearing their heart on their sleeve a little more and being a little more proactive and being a little more vocal about things. And so bang on what you're saying there, I just want to throw out the agreement on it, because I think that's the key for us, just to decide what we want to do, you know, decide what the house is going to look like, and then just do it for Gaelic on both sides of the water. And you know, Rodney,
why don't you just share like the Bain Vabu and Taiskull na Dakacha, and maybe even something about CBFM there, just to let people know what's going on there, just a few of those things you're doing.
Sure. So we have our site, of course, in St. Anne's, been around a long time, but we bought the old St. Joseph's Convent in Mabu a couple of years ago, and so we'll have Bain Vabu as part of the college, and we'll have a first-year university program starting in September. And Kenneth McKenzie is our VP here, and And so there'll be a whole new offering in the areas of, Celtic literature and history and language and other courses, music, of course, and others here on site. But beyond that, there's other things happening. Of course, the Gaelic Immersion School, the Taiscullen and Druckaja. And it does me a world of good to look out the window, and the thing that I can see is the little schoolhouse in the backyard and the kids out playing. And
your own daughter is going, I think.
Yeah, my own daughter, Cassie. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes even talking about it makes me emotional just thinking about it, the opportunity that she has, which others didn't have for many, many years, including many on this call, So it's a great thing, and of course the radio station, CBFM, and playing our own music, and within a couple of years we'll have a Gaelic sister station. So we do different programs, lots of music, of course, and a mixture. It might be Dougie McPhee playing the piano, and the next tune is a Howie MacDonald, and then the next thing is a Gaelic song by Joanne McIntyre. It really varies. And then from 7 to 9 each night, Monday to Friday, Colin MacDonald. It's a Gaelic programming. And but within 2 to 3 years, we'll have a sister station that's done 100% in Gaelic, and we just need to find ways to do these things, and there's no reason. It's not easy to do it, and the governments, they'll buy in. But an old wise politician once told me, and he was pretty aggressive when I first got elected. He said to me, you're a lot more powerful, and he just meant as an individual, and he wasn't just talking about politicians, but he said, you're a lot more powerful than you think. And he said, don't forget that when you're in that position. You can do a lot more than you think you can do. And maybe I was a bit shy at first, and that sort of thing. So it was good advice, and I think it's just good advice for, anybody in our community, that there's a lot, they can do a lot of things, a lot more power than they realize that they have.
Great. Well, thanks for that, guys. That was it's quite inspiring to think of some of the things that are being done and the possibilities, instead of all the focus sometimes on the decline and what can we do to keep weaving this community together. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to take a breakout for 20 minutes. We're all going to go into the small groups again, and we're going to talk about what stood out for us in this discussion. So we're going to put the questions up in the chat room. So what they're going to be is what in the discussion connected with you, and then also when you think of your own Gaelic community, what does Gaylor look or feel like to you, and how do you get there, or how do you stay there if you're already there? So we'll have 20 minutes each, so about 6 minutes per person. And again, there won't be a Gaelic breakout this time, unfortunately. The tech is a little bit beyond us for that one. So we'll see you there in the breakout groups. Lots of good comments coming in here, so please feel free to keep adding, but we'll cut the music off here, Natasha. We're ready to wrap up the session for tonight. So I'd like to invite Ian McLeod up next. He's going to be hosting the next session, so he's going to tell you what will be coming up next Friday night.
Thanks so much, Mike. So next week, I'm hosting a session that is called, this is the working title at least, How Much Gaelic Do You Need to Start Using It? And I'm going to be joined by two people, Bernard Cameron, who is a Gaelic speaker and a teacher in Cape Breton, and Leanne Hinton, who is an academic in California, who has been very involved with a number of California Indigenous language revitalization programs and efforts. So we're going to be talking about how much language do you need, both in terms of an individual learner, but also at the community level before you can start using the language. So I hope you're all able to join us for that very interesting conversation. And now I'll hand it back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Ian. Rodney, have you got your fiddle handy there?
Yeah, I got her here.
All right. Well, what we're going to do is I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It's always lovely to see such a great group. Somebody mentioned in the comments that the online community has really helped extend our Gaelic community. I couldn't agree more. It's so nice to connect with you all every night. So thank you to Gaelic Affairs for sponsoring this, and How We Thrive for helping to support us as we go through this, and hopefully we'll see you at the next few sessions. So Rodney, I'm going to turn it over to you to play us out, and what's the selection you're going to play for us? Maybe tell us a bit about that.
Okay, I'll start off with the tune I made. I'll play through once. Red Alexander Beaton's March. It's one of the first tunes I made, and I made it for my neighbor Red Alexander Beaton, fisherman, Gaelic speaker. And his sister's still living down the road. Sally Boyle's her name, and in fact, she's full of Gaelic, and his brother Donnie Beaton is down in Mabu Harbour. So I'll play that one. Then I'll play just once through two on a Strathspey I made for Rodney MacDonald, my uncle.
Yeah.
And a lot of people on this call would know him, but of course, if you don't, and you go to the Red Shoe Pub someday, or you go to a dance, you'll see this old fella, late 70s, slicked hair, shiny shoes. That's Dalradi, and full of steps. And you'll know him. You'll say, "Oh, that fella." And
a young woman at a dance came up to me one night, Rodney, and said, "Oh, Mike, you have to dance with Donald Roddy. He's amazing." I said, that would be amazing, but
oh yeah, yeah. He's a dandy dancer, and you know, we did a lot of steps over the years in the house, and then we're going to a couple of reels. Not sure yet what, but yeah, I'm just going to a couple of reels. Maybe one that yeah, I'm not sure yet what reel I'm going to. But anyway. That's it.
Thanks very much for that, Rodney. And the music you were listening to when you were doing your little chat piece too was that Marial's the Rule. I imagine she's related to you, Rodney. She's a beaten from Nabucco.
Yeah, closely related.
Yeah.
Through and of course her daughter, Mary Jessie, the piano player as well. And I would often hear before going to dances. Used to play at dances in Boston at the Canadian American Club, and they would, I'd be asking the first time going down. They said, well, who to play with, and they would say, well, if you can get her to play with you, it'd be great to play. And I did end up playing a couple of sets with her one time. Down there. So.
Yeah, and she was on the piano there with Marial Cyril. So thank you so much, Rodney. Thank you, Angus, Brendan, and thank you all for coming. So again, hope we'll see you next week. So take care. Bianach Leif.
Happy the weekend. Well done.
Happy to see you, Angus.
Thank you, Rodney.
Chat soon.